Hey, what's happening? And welcome to The Intersection. I'll be your host, Belanger, and what's on tap for today? Hijacked, the American mindset. Let's talk. When we take a look at the society that we live in, the culture that we claim, and the political and economic system that we sit under, it's becoming more and more clear that there's a lot of misdirection, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of manipulation, and there's a whole host of people propagandizing a lot of different issues, circumstances, situations. There's a lot of people vying for your attention, my attention. And the greatest host, right? The greatest vehicle through which they get our attention nowadays is going to be the internet. Social media platforms, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, so on, so forth. And the American mindset has been hijacked and we didn't even know it. You see, although hijacking anything, cars, planes, a business meeting, is an aggressive takeover, it's an intrusion by force to disrupt, interrupt, and take what does not belong to you, right? And the American mindset has been snatched literally out of individuals and been replaced with groupthink. Nobody seems to be able or willing to think for themselves. If they don't hear it on social media, if they don't verify it through clicks, shares, and likes, it must not have been true. And it really kind of seems like we're in one of those series of The Walking Dead, where you got zombies walking around mindless looking for a source to feed upon. And everybody's feeding upon everybody else. One mindless person then feeds on another mindless person. That mindless person goes and feeds on another person to create more mindlessness. Till we're walking around, everybody's seeking information, but they're starving for truth. Let me say that again. Everybody seems to be seeking information, but they're starving for truth. Why? Because you have mindlessness producing more mindlessness. See, it doesn't take long for me anymore, after 25 years of working with people, to hear very quickly, very clearly, wow, this person doesn't have a clue. Because what you hear people say in their conversations is what they've heard somebody else say through some type of media venue. Nobody seems to be able to form an individual opinion or thought, nothing authentic anymore. Everybody seems to be protesting something. Everybody seems to be a victim of something. Everybody seems to be uh, trying to shout out some type of issue or some type of circumstance. But they're not even sure if it's their circumstance or if it's someone else's. They're not even sure if it's a viable issue or a dead issue. And when you really take a look at where we are, right, it's only going to get worse. We're in that space and place where the Bible says that there will be a day at the end where people will say right is wrong and wrong is right. And that's exactly where we are. But let's talk about what has brought us to this point. There's been many points of history where we have talked about being at the end. There have been many points in our society where things have looked bad. And then something happens major and there was a resurgence. You guys all remember, well, maybe you don't because some of you may not have even been born. But I'm old enough to remember the 80s and 90s. And I remember when 1999 hit and the term Y2K was created, which just simply meant the year 2000. And I remember as August rolled around, I remember people starting to talk about, hey, you better pull your money out of the bank because the banking system, the economic system, they're not set up for 2000. Why? Because as long as we've been living, meaning those people who were alive at that point, we've only lived in the 1900s. And the thought was that the banking system wasn't set up and you would lose your money once it became 2000. And people literally were taking their money out of the bank, walking around with piles of cash in their pockets, hiding it up under their mattress, sticking it up under the pillow, buying safes to put in their closet because they didn't trust that the banking system would stand up to the change to a new millennium. But that was a part of groupthink. See, all it took was one person to say it to another person, and that person to tell it to another person. And then those three people turned into six. Those six people turned into 12. Those 12 people turned into 24, so on and so forth, until you had heard it enough till the issue became believable. And so when we look at our culture and the rubble that it actually is in, I think there's three major culprits over the course of the last 40 or 50 years that have contributed to the mindlessness, the hijacking of the American mindset. I think the first bad actor is the church. Yes, the Christian church. I'm not talking about denominations. I'm not talking about Catholics. I'm not talking about those people who call themselves Pentecostals. I'm not talking about Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian. None of that. I'm simply talking about the American church. You see, the narrative around America is that America was built how? On godly principles. Now, whether you agree with that or not, that's what the sentiment is. Now, I've done enough reading about who is called the founding fathers to know that those dudes, their thoughts were not really godly. Now I guess you can have godly principles even if you don't really hold true to who God is. Another story for another day. I guess that's the context of being moral and having morals, right? Right. Those morals go right out of the window if you're not a moral person. But nevertheless, so if America was founded on godly principles, then that means the church in America should flourish. And it has, right? For a season, the American church has flourished, both the white church, quote unquote, the black church, quote unquote, the Hispanic church, quote unquote, the Asian church, all under the umbrella of Christianity. They all have seen a heyday. Stay with me. But something happened in the church that kind of caused church to be looked at differently. People were hurt, they were manipulated, there was some sexual impropriety, there was some sexual assault, there was some kids being messed with, there was some under the table dealing in the church. And part of that is because church became a big business, a billion-dollar industry. And anytime money takes precedence over principle, over righteousness, over holiness, you're going to begin to have corrupt leaders. Why? Well, not every leader that was in a pulpit or serving in some type of church platform, not all of them were called by God. A lot of people took on pastoring and ministering as an occupation, not a calling. And so when your calling is just an occupation, then it sets up for money to turn your attention elsewhere from God. You see, let's get some understanding. An occupation is for pay. Pastoring is a calling. So when I start looking at my pastoring or my preaching as my occupation, then I'm going to also be looking for the pay. And the more I get paid, the more I'll turn away from God and begin to do the bidding of those who pay. I'll begin to preach what the congregation wants me to preach. I'll begin to say soft messages in order to get more butts in the seats. I will begin to have political jargon from the pulpit. Why? Because whoever writes the biggest check, unfortunately, if I'm here just for occupation, I'll begin to do their bidding. And I think that was the first turn or downturn of the American church. You see, I remember a day when I think it was in the 1980s when Jim Baker and Tammy Faye Baker fell. I think their ministry was called PTL. They were one of the biggest ministries happening right then. I guess you could call it one of the first mega churches because they were quote unquote TV evangelists, right? And then also in that same era with Jimmy Baker and Tammy Faye, or Jim Baker and Tammy Faye, also was what's that dude's name? Jimmy Swaggart. And when Jimmy Swaggart came along, he fell into some impropriety with some women. Now, these two dudes, they weren't the only two, but these two dudes who were preaching, they were national and international, well known. When they began to fall, you begin to wonder, well, can I trust any of these leaders? And then you start seeing in the 1990s into the 2000s, 2010s, excuse me. And then even most recently, one of the major pastors, of course, TD Jakes, has had some impropriety. Whether anything ever becomes of the allegations that he was doing some bad deeds being associated with Diddy, the message is out there. And it's a stain on the church. So then when people began to wonder, how can I trust the church? Then it sets up to look for another leader. Maybe look for another religion. Maybe put away religion altogether. Maybe give up on your faith. Maybe if this is what Christians are like, then I don't need Christianity. If Christians are out here manipulating and falling into scandal and they're getting high on drugs and they're drinking and sexing and pornography and all these kind of things, why would they have wanted that? And the church impropriety and bad leadership didn't stop there. Because in the 2000s, 2010, after all of the misdeeds, after all of the poor leadership, the bad examples, the the criminal charges, so on and so forth that came out of the church, then the church didn't know what the rightful way to be married was. So then they got in bed with the LGBTQ, and that's no disrespect. I just don't know all the letters. I don't have time to keep up with all of those things. But then the church couldn't figure out whether marriage was for man and woman or man and man or woman and woman. So then how does that affect the people who follow? Then they begin to question. More standard, more morals, more integrity go right out the window. And then the church not only began to change or accept different defining of marriage, then the church got in bed again with what was formerly considered perversion sexually in the context of not just same sex marriage, but same sex relationships in general, married or unmarried. And then the church began to let the world tell them how they should navigate the scriptures in those same contexts. And so now nobody really wants to follow the church. And I think that's where the American mindset began to be hijacked, where we were once clear on the things of God. We understood principle, integrity. We understood what it looked like to be married and be committed, to keep our purity, to protect our values, to see family as man, woman, children, to get up and go to work and grind and pay your bills and do all of your neighborly duties, your wifely duties, your husband duties. Now everything's just a free for all. And so now it's the mindless leading the mindless. But I think the second cause of where we are as it pertains to an American mindset is absolutely the breakdown of the family, which I just referenced. You see, when men, I won't get into the policies and procedures that kind of led men out of the home, but we understand from the 1930s all the way to current day, every decade had its own issue with men. There was a time where men were committing suicide at a high rate due to the fact they couldn't find employment, therefore they felt worthless. There was a time where men uh, felt like they were no longer needed because other provisions were being provided. There was a time where you had divorce that was once looked at as a no-go, figure out how to work it out, but then it became socially and culturally acceptable, and then the floodgates were opened. And then came the advent, the onslaught of abortions coming through the 1970s. And then you had drugs being filtered into the American population, which also broke down the family. And then you had the sexual revolution of the 1990s and all the way into the current day. And all of those aspects broke down the structure and stronghold that was the family. Now, when there's no men in the home, women are left to figure it out all by themselves. But when women are left to figure it out all by themselves, then there is a portion of your childhood that's going to be left to do what? Figure it out all by yourself. Because if mama is a single parent, she also has to be an employee. So there is a portion of time where you're at home alone, figuring it out. You become a pseudo parent. You are trying to provide provision for your brother and sister. You cooking supper, you helping them with homework, all those kind of things to kind of supplement for the absence of the second parent. And so the breakdown of the family absolutely has contributed to this mindlessness. You see, because when mama's gone and you don't get that male identity, then you only are receptive to one side of the gender equation. And that's the emotionalism and the feeling based lifestyle of the mama. She's worn down, she's worn out, she's stressed out, she's frustrated. Even if she has education, even if she has a good job, there is something to be said when you handling the whole load alone. So the breakdown of the family, I think, is the second major reason for the American mindset to be hijacked. You see, I remember a day when you come home from school and there's no parent there, and what you couldn't watch when mama was there or when mama and daddy was there, you plugged into because you were the pseudo adult in the home. You didn't have no rules, you didn't have no boundaries. And listen, rules are no good if there's nobody present to uphold them. How many times do you remember being told not to do something while your parent was gone, but you did the very thing when when they were gone? Because there's nobody there to uphold the rules and regulations of the home. And so now, where you once wouldn't have thought about smoking cigarettes, now you're smoking cigarettes because you got hours. Let's just talk about a regular first shift. First shift, 8 to 5, 9 to 6, something like that. You get off the bus at 3:30, 4 o'clock. You got 2 hours by yourself. And because nobody's there to enforce boundaries, you're left to your own devices. So you make it up as you go. The context is if you don't get caught, you didn't do wrong. And so then it starts with smoking, cigarettes, maybe a little beer, then some weed. Next thing you know, you get interested in sex. Now you're trying to have sex. Nobody's there. How do you think teenage pregnancy happened? It's because you were being a pseudo adult. Why? Because of the breakdown of the family. And there's tons and tons of reasons why this happened and why the broken family was sustained in America. But that's not this conversation. I'm just telling you how we've gotten to a place of all of this mindlessness. You can turn on the news in any city on any day, and you see young boys killing young boys. You see girls killing girls. You see boys killing girls. You see some type of arrest for fentanyl, some type of arrest for heroin. Somebody died from an overdose. Why? Why is this happening? The breakdown in the church, the removal of godly leadership, and the breakdown in the family. The third reason is when you don't have leadership from a godly context, when your family is broke down and broke up, then you turn to a surrogate. And for a lot of people, social media has become the surrogate parent, the surrogate leader. You don't know how many times I go into a session and somebody will say, "Hey, I heard this on TikTok. I heard this on Instagram. I saw this on Facebook. What do you think about it?" And I tell them, "Look, I don't think anything about it." You know why? Because whoever told you those things, whoever communicated that to you, they're trying to entertain you. They don't have a vested interest in your well being. But because it's what's popular, it's what's easily accessible, it's flooded every day by millions of people and billions of hours spent plugged into a system of propaganda and an algorithm that feeds you over and over and over debauchery, hurt, pain, manipulation. And as long as you give them your time, your effort, your energy, your clicks, your likes, and your shares, they're going to continue to feed you. So, how are you going to get your right mind back? How are you going to get your right mind back in this day and era? You see, the first key is to recognize or to ask yourself, am I thinking for me or am I thinking for you? That's the first real question. Who are you thinking for? Who's influencing your decisions? Who influences your behavior? Are you making progress, staying still, or are you regressing? See, that's a call. See, if you find yourself regressing or just standing still in life, that's a call that you need to get your right mind back. The mind that you have ownership over. The mind that you need to be choosing what feeds it. See, because whatever you feed yourself, that's what you're going to become. So if you feed yourself trash, you're going to end up with trash behavior because you're going to have trash thinking. That's why when you look at all of the social media outlets, the biggest channels, the channels with the biggest pool, the channels that keep falling into your algorithm, they're only feeding you somebody else's hurt, shame, and lowlights. You guys remember how people make videos and crash out? And then people will take it, react to it, package it, give it to you, and you'll watch it hours upon hours at a time, not recognizing that you're wasting your most valuable asset, which is time. You see, I know this video is approaching about 25, 30 minutes, but I'm not here to entertain you. I'm here to challenge you to get your right mind back. So the first thing I'm going to challenge you to do is just take a step back and look how you're spending your time, your effort, your energy, and your money. Pay attention to those things because whatever you put your time, effort, and energy into, that's what you appreciate. That's what you have value for. Pay attention to how many hours per day you're spending on your phone. Turn your phone tracking app on and just see. See how many hours you spend watching people feed you garbage. And you wonder why life doesn't change. You wonder why you always upset, frustrated, pissed off, angry, aggravated. It's simply because of what you have been ingesting. This next video, I'm going to take you to some current news, and I'm going to show you and break down for you how the American mindset has been hijacked. And so I hope that you'll come back, hang out with us a little bit. Like I said, my goal is not to entertain. My goal is to teach, train, educate, and provide encouragement. So until next time, I'm your Boulanger, and I'm out.